The alternative social media network Parler says that it warned the FBI repeatedly in the days and weeks leading up to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. This comes as lawmakers probe why law enforcement agencies like the FBI did not respond more aggressively to threats of violence surrounding the joint session of Congress. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge has the latest.
Days before rioters pushed their way into the Capitol, Parler says it referred violent content to the FBI more than 50 times, including specific threats being planned. Some posts called for an armed force of 150,000 on January 6th to disrupt the Electoral College. Another read, "This is the final stand, and I trust the American people will take back the USA with force, and many are ready to die." Another post claimed then President Trump's rally was a call to cause chaos.
You've read these social media posts. How would you characterize them?
Inflammatory and concerning.
Jeff James is a former Secret Service intelligence analyst.
Several things. You look at, do they have the means, do they have the opportunity, and do they have the will? And we're reading those posts. It looks like absolutely they had all three.
Meanwhile, a judge released more members of the Oath Keepers militia pending trial. The group was seen in a stack formation breaching the Capitol. Last night, former President Trump defended the rioters.
It was a zero threat. Right from the start, it was zero threat.
But over 100 rioters have been charged with assaulting federal officers or local police.
And Catherine joins me now. Catherine, lawyers for Parler discuss some of the claims that the social media network referred to the FBI and a lawyer to New York, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. Maloney is the chairwoman of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. So what more are we learning about what Parler says it did ahead of the events on January 6th?
Well, based on the documents we reviewed here today at CBS News, they say that they warned the FBI in the weeks leading up to January 6th that a lot of violent content was being posted on their platform, and they say they shared that violent content with the FBI along with the information of the users who posted it. We've looked through those records, and I can tell you, Lana, that there was a lot of information that simply was not appropriate to broadcast on television or to stream because of the direct nature of the threats against specific lawmakers or other politicians. So based on the assessment from this former Secret Service analyst, he said this was very concerning. And in his view, while it's easy to Monday morning quarterback, he felt that it really necessitated more aggressive action by the FBI prior to January 6th. And the posture really should have been heightened. And as you know, the FBI is facing a lot of criticism about other warnings that it's accused of missing just on the evening of the attack itself.
Yeah, given what you're telling us now, Catherine, about the documents that you reviewed and the specificity of those threats, I imagine that this raises new questions for the FBI, Capitol Police, and other law enforcement agencies.
Well, we know about something called the Norfolk Alert. It's not a memo or an assessment, but it's like sort of like data miner. It's like a flash alert about new information. It came out of their office in Norfolk, Virginia on the evening before the riots, and it talked about individuals posting online to be ready for war at the Capitol. I think you know through following this and your reporting that warning kind of got lost in the after hours shuffle, and nobody picked up the phone to say to the Capitol Police, this is the kind of information that we're dealing with. But I think to bottom line it for folks at home, I always come back to the same idea. You had businesses all over Washington, D.C. in the days leading up to January 6th boarding up their shops. You know, Subway does not have a special intelligence stream that isn't available or not available to the FBI, okay? So that tells you that the mood on the street was such that people were taking precautions to secure their businesses. So that really begs the question, why was there, I don't want to say a reluctance, but why was there not more aggressive action and a more stepped up security posture on January 6th, just given what I said about what local businesses were doing here in Washington?
Right. And since we had been reporting on it, since we saw it with local businesses, it shouldn't have been the surprise that it seemed like it was. So Overall, Catherine, where do things stand with the investigation into the January 6th attack and the prosecution of those involved?
I think, Lana, we're heading into the 3-month mark, and we're coming up to a very interesting inflection point. Based on my reporting, we're nearing this decision as to whether the most serious charges may be brought against a limited and discrete group of individuals. And those are the charges of sedition. Sedition would be a very high threshold to cross because you have to almost kind of get inside the mind of the individuals to understand their intent. It would be a much higher threshold than the current charges that are on the table, which are broader conspiracy charges. The other thing we're starting to see is that there may have been some overreach by the federal prosecutors in these cases in terms of the outlining of at least 2 different conspiracies. And I say that because, as we mentioned in the package tonight, a number of the alleged members of the Oath Keepers, this is one of the militias that's accused of being part of a broader conspiracy to commit violence on the day of January 6th. A number of them have now been released pending trial, and to simplify it, on the basis that the allegations against them, not all of them have really, some of them have washed out, I guess it would say. The evidence doesn't quite support the severity of the charge the government has made. So again, there's this interesting inflection point, whether they're going to reach up for the highest charge of sedition in some cases, which would go to this idea of getting inside the minds of the people who were there that day. And maybe, on the other hand, dialing back some of these charges, especially related to conspiracy, because the evidence may not ultimately support conviction of that charge.
Interesting, too, how social media and people actually broadcasting their thoughts and intent.
It's just,
right.
yeah. Well, I don't know.
You're right, exactly.
There's enough said about that. That's right.
Yeah, well, so speaking of the Oath Keepers, Catherine, earlier this week, you learned that the Justice Department actually found significant coordination between members of not just the Oath Keepers, but another extremist group, the Proud Boys, in the lead up to the storming of the Capitol. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, based on the court documents, the allegation is that an alleged member of the Oath Keepers was on, I believe it was Facebook, if my memory serves me correctly, posting messages about how he was reaching out not only to the Proud Boys, but also a group in Florida called the 3 Percenters, another sort of militia type group that's described as being on the right. And he was talking about coordination and that the Proud Boys would be, his words, a force multiplier on the day. So this is an extremely important development because it goes to the idea that, I'm just going to take one step back here. Think about the day of January 6th. And remember, we initially saw the video of these groups pushing themselves through those outer barriers before they got to the Capitol. You remember that? It was around 1 o'clock. What we know now is that those individuals were part of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. So they were sort of the tip of the spear, if you will, according to the court documents on January 6th. So the idea that they were coordinating in advance, I think, you know, is very significant in terms of the broader case because they were first in, if you will, on that day.
Yeah, I remember exactly how surprised we were at the first at those first barriers being broken. Correct. And then all that followed. Catherine, thank you for staying on top of all of it.
Of course.
And for your fantastic reporting.
You're welcome.